Alrighty, so for Module 4, we'll be thinking about human relations, privacy, and confidentiality. And these are really important within the realm of applied psychology. And so the section 3 of the ethics code is human relations, and this is a pretty wide spectrum of things. But again, if we think of our sort of like, yes, do this, no, don't do this, it becomes pretty simple. No, don't discriminate unfairly. No, don't engage in sexual harassment. Again, it seems silly that I need to say this, but unfortunately it's not, because have been people who have violated these repeatedly. There's probably someone out there violating one of these right now, right? No, don't engage in other forms of harassment. Yes, avoid harm with anyone you're interacting with. No, don't engage in multiple relationships unless you can absolutely not avoid it, right? Sometimes that's the case. No, don't engage in conflicts of interest, right? If your mom owns a company and they come to your company and they want to get a loan, you should not be their loan officer, right? Just simple things like that. Third-party requests for service. You should navigate those carefully. Think about them, right? And think about empowering the actual person who needs your service rather than the third party. No, don't engage in exploitative relationships. Yes, cooperate with other professionals. Yes, have people give informed consent. And this will come up a couple different times because it's so important. So we want informed consent if someone's doing an assessment. We want informed consent if we're doing therapy. We want informed consent if we're doing research. Basically, we want people we're interacting with to know why we're doing what we're doing, what their rights are, and how we can go from there. There's a whole section on if you're giving psychological services to organizations or through organizations. How do you manage that? What if the organization is your client? Again, that's really important for consultants and other applied psychologists. And then interruption of psychological services. What if you get sick? How are you going to handle that? So what are some of these practical applications of human relation? And there's a lot of chapters in the Hatcher book that talk about this. So conflict of interest, right? This might differ among professions, what's considered a conflict of interest versus not. But the main idea is you should never put yourself in a situation where you can't be objective. You want to be transparent, but also ethical within that transparency. You want to try to even avoid the appearance of conflict of interest for professionalism, and because in just about any industry, your reputation is everything. If you don't have your reputation, you're not going to do well. We want to avoid impairment of judgment because of conflicts of interest, and above all, avoid bribes of any kind. Give you a horrible example. A year or two before I started my internship at the Medical College of Georgia, the head of the department was being given money for his research by a pharmaceutical company. Turns out he was just pocketing it. So we had new policies in place where anyone within the Department of Behavioral Health was not allowed to take so much as a pen from a pharma company. Yeah, you want to avoid, again, that even the potential appearance of conflict. And then challenging interactions. Again, don't exploit people. Sounds silly, but it's happened a lot, right? And it happens a lot in Western capitalism without us thinking of it as being exploitative. Making people work overtime, often without pay, asking people to do you favors, work outside of work, right? People will do it because they fear if they don't, they won't get the job, or they won't get the promotion, or they won't get promoted, right? Or they'll lose their job. And so we need to think about like not engaging in multiple relationships with clients of any kind, right? Not just therapy clients, but clients at whatever business we work in. With coworkers, a lot of times there are policies in place that say you're not supposed to be in relationships with your coworkers because it can get sticky, or not within the same department, for example. This comes trickier if, let's say, you work in a rural area, right? Your mechanic might also be your client, right? And what if you tick him off? Like, you're going to be worried about how he's going to treat your car the next time, right? So this has to be, you know, navigated very carefully and ethically. Don't have sexual relationships that complicate things. Don't do it. Sexual and other harassment, again, just don't do it. There are laws that cover this. Title VII is about workplace equity. Title IX is about equity within the educational system. And if someone perceives it as being harassed, it's harassment. Like, the courts over and over have said that. So even if, like, people are like, nah, bro, just everybody does that, that's not harassment, doesn't matter. If the person being harassed feels they're being harassed, it's harassment. We need to think about our culture. We have a culture where people don't believe victims of harassment, where people justify the actions of the harassers, right? We have a culture that devalues women and people of color and other minoritized groups, right? And so we as psychologists have an ethical obligation to push back against that and support people. Why do people not harass? Like, it's just so obvious, but some people need justification. Moral reasons, their values, their religious reasons, the consequences within their workplace, legal consequences, right? Good. Whatever keeps people from harassing other people, let's keep it up, right? And then unfair discrimination. Again, I mentioned Title VII. People will treat people differently based on their assumptions. Oh, she's a woman, so she can't do math. I just saw a bunch of the creators I follow ripping someone to shreds who said that. I love that so much. Right? Or, oh, because this person is from this cultural group, they obviously do this, right? And it may or may not be the case. Can have implicit bias, where, like, things are just sort of, they sneak in, and the person themselves who is being discriminatory might not even realize they're doing it. But there's often explicit bias as well. So there are laws and formal policies against these things, but we really need to help people avoid the concept of, like, I don't see it, or I don't harass anybody, I don't even think about it, therefore it doesn't exist. This has happened a lot to people who have come forward who they themselves have been harassed, discriminated against, even abused. And people will be like, that person's a good person to me. They never do that. Just because they're a good person to you doesn't mean they're always a good person, right? It's a harsh truth. So the section 4 is about privacy and confidentiality. And again, even if we're not in a healthcare setting, these are things we need to be thinking about. What are our ethical obligations for these within our workplace? Yes, maintain confidentiality. Again, within the limits of what you need to do. And that's why number 2 here is discussing those limits. So, for example, within a therapeutic setting, you have to disclose the first session. If you ever tell me you are a potential harm to yourself or somebody else and you can't guarantee safety, if I find out about the abuse of a child, an elder, or someone with a developmental delay who is dependent on someone else, I have to break confidentiality to report it. Things along those lines. But there might be some of that within your workplace, right? So, for example, people that work in the military, they might have to say, there's no confidentiality. Anything you say to me gets reported up the chain, right? So you need to know that in your place of work. If you're going to record people, you need their informed consent to do that. You need to explain why you're doing that, how that recording will get used. You want to minimize intrusions on privacy as much as possible, right? Not everybody needs to see someone's personnel file or know something about it. Yes, disclose when you need to disclose, but if there's something you don't need to disclose, don't, right? Seek out consultations if you're not sure what to do. It's okay to talk to other people in sort of what we would call your bubble or web of confidentiality. another employee sort of who works in the same office, right? Or a friend of mine has consulted with me, not giving me client information about like a client she has. That's okay. Seek help when you need it, right? If you are going to talk about things for didactic purposes, like teaching, right? I just said a friend of mine has done this. I didn't give you her name. I didn't give you the name of her client. I don't even know the name of her client, right? I didn't tell you where she is. I didn't tell you what kind of practice she was doing, right? You can de-identify things in a lot of ways so that there's no way anyone could ever identify um, anything about that particular person, but it can still be informative in teaching. So again, minimizing these privacy intrusions, maintaining confidentiality. So thinking about when do we or do we not have a right to privacy? And just differentiating here that privacy concerns people, confidentiality concerns the information or data about those people. And these are really important in professional settings. And again, you don't have to be in healthcare for these to be really important. The easiest way to get an employee not to trust you is for people to find out you've disclosed information about them when you didn't need to do so, right? So being ethical also means building trust with employees and keeping their support, right? And that just helps make your whole work culture better.